Something that was high profile. Let's talk about the Proud Boys. It's January 6th. We're a few years out now from what happened. I know that you're still working for, yes, I know that you're still working on appeal with some of them. Can you talk about what happened originally? Like, lead us through what happened with them.
So the Proud Boys, I represented and still represent Joe Biggs. I represented him in a trial in Washington, D.C. that took about 5.5 months. And it was the government's theory that the Proud Boys were part of a broader plan to use violence to stop the election of Joe Biden. And so the government charged seditious conspiracy, something that's almost never been used in American law. And all seditious conspiracy meant in that case was they agreed to use violence to oppose the authority of the United States government. In this case, by storming the Capitol on January 6th to prevent the counting of electoral votes. Mm-hmm. At trial, at opening statements, the government said they were going to show that there was a plan. They never did prove that there was a plan. What they proved is that a lot of emotional people went to the mall, Capitol Mall on January 6th, and they reacted, and then things became violent. So at closing argument, the prosecution argued that this could have been what's called an implicit conspiracy formed at the moment the barricades were burst. In other words, that these people knew one another's mind, agreed through their conduct to act. And that just struck me as a miscarriage of justice, because what it said was if you use inflammatory speech and you go to an event and violence occurs, they're going to use that inflammatory speech as circumstantial evidence of your criminal intent. And thus, dissent is always at risk in the United States of being criminalized. You hear people talk about lawfare. I think that's what they're talking about. So we're even though the verdict was returned, I think in May, this is 2025, in May of 2023, our briefs still haven't been submitted to the appellate court. It's about 100. Geez, I think it's 130,000 page trial transcript. It's going to take a little while to get through. But in the meantime, and the briefs are due in May. In the meantime, we're seeking pardons from Donald Trump, and we're reasonably optimistic that we'll get them as soon as January 21st.
Oh, wow. Okay. What else are you, I know we talked about this a little off air, but tell people what else you're working on right now that you're excited about.
I'm just trying to, I had a rough 5 years between Alex Jones, the Dulos case, and the Proud Boys. That's about all I did. And, so,
those are some tough ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And none of the cases worked out well for me, which means I get slaughtered on social media. Fortunately, my phone still rings off the hook, and I've tried half a dozen cases since. And I'm just trying to get reacquainted with the humdrum aspects of the law, what I call ordinary murder, ordinary robbery, ordinary chaos. And so I'm getting ready for a murder trial right now.
Well, hold on. I want to ask you, when you say it hasn't gone well for you. I mean, a lot of these people were not, it was a very uphill battle. So I think going well for you, would you have thought that meant they get off, or they were given a harsher sentence than you thought and you're still working on it? What does that mean for you?
There's a saying among criminal defense lawyers, you're only as good as your last verdict, and the public doesn't want to know the reasons or what's behind it. If you lost, you lost. And, it's not an athletic event. If it was an athletic event, I'm cocky enough to say I'd win every time because I think I'm that good. And I know the code of evidence that well. And, I'll go walk into a room with 4 lawyers on the other side, and I'll say, that's all you got? I like my odds. I'm cocky that way. But I'm better to, and I'm competitive. I don't like losing, period.
But when you say win, does that mean getting them off completely? I mean, some of these people, that was not ever an option, I would think.
By the time, if you don't believe, when you walk into a courtroom, if you don't believe you can win, you should turn the file over to someone else. Your job is to find a way to win. And, I used to hang out with Jerry Spence a lot years ago. I taught at his trial lawyers college out in Wyoming. And he likes to say he never lost a criminal case. I don't know what that means. And by the way, if he happens to see this, he turns 96 today. So happy birthday, Jerry. Gosh. Yeah, 96. Think about that.
Does he still wear those jackets with the fringes?
He probably still has them. I haven't seen him in a couple of years. He spends most of his time in Santa Barbara now, and he's a very good painter. And so, I went out to sit with him one afternoon. Actually, I was representing him and members of the board of his trial lawyers college in a legal dispute. And I thought, man, what a wonderful painter he is. Great storyteller, good writer, fantastic lawyer. But, it just wasn't fun being in the news on the losing side of a case with people who are unpopular. There are people who make a avocation out of breaking my stones, and I'd much rather have nice things said of me than not. But given the choices I've made, you take what you get.
Right. Well, it's interesting because for you, I think people just look at you and I'm assuming, are angry with you or make statements because you're representing people that so many people have a hard time believing, wishing they had representation at all. So I think that just comes on you, but it doesn't show whether or not nobody's really talking about whether or not you're a good lawyer or not. Even if you got them off, people would say, "Oh my God, what a scumbag this
No,
guy
I
is."
know, I
Right?
know, I know.
So
It's just but I mean, I'm trying to be real with you, and it just does
yeah,
hurt. I mean,
I
I'm
know.
not going to lie and say it's all great. I'm that tough a guy. I'm not. I have a new office manager, and she'd heard a little bit about me before she came here, and after she'd been here for about a month, she says, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Well, you are," and she says, "You're not at all what I thought you'd be," and I said, "Well, what does that mean?" "I thought you'd be this really nasty, loud prick. You're
Mm.
soft spoken, and you're a nice guy." And I'm like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Call my wife, let her know. My wife was very disappointed in some of the choices of clients that I had in the last few years, and that was
Right.
difficult.
Right. I can imagine. But yes, you come off as being empathetic and have more to you than, just a tough external layer. I want to ask you about the Brian Koberger case, the Idaho murders. What are your thoughts on the defense challenges in cases like his where DNA evidence and public fascination seem to dominate the narrative for him?
It's two separate questions. The public fascination thing is an interesting question. I've had many cases where there was enormous public fascination with what happened. For example, a man once threw his 7-month-old child off the biggest bridge in the state and then jumped in after him. The child didn't survive. He did. So he was accused with murder. And I thought it's going to be impossible to pick a jury in this case because everybody was talking about it. But what you find when you walk into a court is, notwithstanding the public fascination, most people have their own dramas. I don't know
Mm.
you. This is the first time we met. I'm guessing you have a life beyond misunderstood. And sometimes it's going well and sometimes it's not. And sometimes your heart is broken and you're lonely and you wish you had somebody to talk to. And that's the world that all of us live in. We're not reading the newspaper saying, "Oh, that's the guy." And so what I have found is often people haven't even heard of the cases. And those who have often reach negative conclusions. You get them off the jury. I've sat with many a person about whom horrible things were written in the paper, and I said, "Look, here's the good news. If there are 100 people out there, 90 of them don't know who we are, and they don't could care less who you are.
Mm.
Of the 10 that remain, 6 of them think you're a scumbag, and now they know why. 2 of them maybe like you, and they don't believe the allegations, and the other 2 people, they're unsure, and that's who we're fighting for here." So I think they just have to ignore the public outcry and prepare their jury selection, their voir dire to screen those people out. As to DNA evidence, I love DNA evidence. The science is really fascinating, and it's difficult. But DNA experts are so used to being given a free pass that if you really challenge them, you'd be surprised at what you can get. So in Connecticut, for example, it used to be that I don't have a report on my desk here, but it used to be that DNA was reported. DNA, what is DNA? It's the stuff of life, right? We've got these 3 billion proteins, attached to one another, or, base pairs, and the state will locate about 23 of them. And of all those 3 billion pairs, 99% of ours are identical to apes. So the trick is locating those few that distinguish us, not just from the apes, but from one another, and then comparing knowns versus unknowns. Well, did you know that there's a largely subjective element in interpretation of DNA evidence? They compare peaks of proteins at certain points, and sometimes the peaks are what are known as artifacts. That's when you don't get a match. Sometimes they're a match, and that's when they get the guy they want. And so, if you spend your time and you do your homework, you're going to have a lot of fun with DNA evidence. And the fact that his DNA may have been on an item means that he was there. It doesn't mean that he did it. Now, how are you going to account that he was there? Is it a false positive? I mean, I don't know enough about the evidence in that case, but I know that it's a lot of work in that.
Right. Okay.